living in surveyed times. Never in human history have our locations been as trackable as they are today. However, despite that, sometimes there are disappearances, even recently, that defy all logic. In this video, I'm going to tell you some of the strangest disappearances ever recorded, and let me tell you now, some of these are bizarre. For example, we have one case where the mother of the victim swears that he came back in the middle of the night just to be taken away again. We have a case where a teenager went missing and he was replaced by an imposter who proceeded to live with the victim's family for 5 months. And we have one case where there has been a breakthrough this very week. So let's start with some of the ones you know, and as the video goes on, things are going to get a little bit more obscure and you might not have heard of a few of them towards the end. So let's get into things, and don't forget that Big Brother is watching you. So first up, I want to speak about Madeleine McCann, and I don't know how popular she is abroad, but over here in the UK, she is huge. This is by far and away the most popular abducting or person going missing I have ever heard of, and I think most people over here have ever heard of. The amount of conspiracy theories, the amount of investigations, even now, I mean it was 2007 she went missing, even now in 2020, 15 years later, they have come up to absolute naught. So what's the story then? On the 3rd of November 2007, 3-year-old Madeleine McCann disappeared from her bed in her holiday apartment in Portugal. Her family were on holiday at the time, they were from Liverpool originally, and her parents had gone and left her with her 2-year-old twin siblings alone while they had gone to eat with some friends at a tapas restaurant nearby. They had left at 8:30 and her father had checked in on the children at 9:05. This was the last time that Madeleine would ever be seen. When they returned at 10 PM, she was reported missing. What happened in those 55 minutes between the time that Jerry left her and the time that he returned? This is a question that's been on everyone's mind for 15 years now. Somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to Madeleine McCann, somewhere. So some people think that her parents killed her. Some people think that she was abducted but might still be alive, and some people are more certain that she is dead. Hopefully one day we'll be able to figure it out. Just like the Zodiac Killer a few months ago, in the future we might be privy to more advanced technology and we might finally be able to put the pieces together and know for certain what happened to her. Today is not that day though, and as of the 14th of January 2022, she is still unfound and has been missing for 15 years now. Whatever happened, I think we all hope that someday we get to the bottom of it. Asha Degree was a 9-year-old girl who went missing on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2000. She lived in Shelby, North Carolina at the time. In the early hours of the morning, for some unknown reason, she left her bedside and went out into the lashing rain, walking north nearby the highway despite weather being awful. She had been spotted by a concerned motorist over 2 kilometers away from her house who went to approach her, but as they got close, Asha ran into the woods, never to be seen again. That day, an intense search was called to find her, and many of her personal belongings that she left with were found, but not Asha herself. Did she run away from home? And if so, why did she do it? Could she have been abducted? It's possible. The only person who saw her was a truck driver, but his story matches up with the evidence that was found. He had seen her at some point between 2:45 and 4:15 in the morning, meaning that she would have left home at some point between 2:45 and 3:30 AM. This would have been in the lashing rain, and it just doesn't make any sense why. Why did she run away from home? What possessed her to leave? Was she coerced to do so? We just don't have many answers, and most leads were dead ends soon after they were found. So what happened to her remains a mystery to this very day, and my heart does bleed for Asha and everyone else on this list. This is a really tough one to do for me personally, because a lot of them are children and teenagers, and it does break my heart. These disappearances get no closure, which must be so much harder than just death, a conclusive answer, but these ones will always be up in the air. What happened? Could it be worse than death? I mean, it's a tragedy. Regardless, we'll march on to Amy Lynn Bradley. She was a 23-year-old woman who went missing in March 1998 on a cruise ship. Originally from Virginia, the woman went missing on the Rhapsody of the Seas. She had been partying with her brother in the cruise nightclub and had returned to their cabin 5 minutes apart, with her brother Brad heading in at 3:30 AM and her following 5 minutes later. This has been backed up by the door logs. The two chatted for a while before heading to bed. Her father checked in on her at some point between 5:15 and 5:30 AM and saw her. He did the same thing again at 6 AM, but she, along with her cigarettes and lighter, were nowhere to be found. So in a mere 30 to 45 minutes, she was gone forever. There are two main theories of what happened to her. One is that she fell overboard, but apparently this is unlikely because despite her being drunk, she was apparently a very strong swimmer, and this just didn't really match up to what people knew about her. Additionally, they searched high and low in the area that she would have gone missing, and they could not find any body. Authorities first thought that she might have committed suicide, but again, this doesn't have too much backing to it. Another theory is that she might have been trafficked, and this is consistently brought up. And there were some small little nuggets that might point to this, such as the photographs taken by the photographer being taken, an inconsistent story given by a member of the crew's band that she spent time with, and a suspicious waiter who kept on pestering her for drinks when the crews reached land. The biggest lead, however, has to be this photograph right here, as back in 2005 an email was sent to the Bradley family containing two photographs of a woman that closely resembled Amy. The photographs were observed by a member of an organisation that attempts to track victims on sites that feature sex workers, and this was one of the main pieces of evidence that fed into the current theory of Amy being abducted and sold into the illegal sex industry. There's also a theory that she was murdered and thrown overboard, with a jawbone being found washed up on shore, but this has never been confirmed to be Bradley's. This is where the trail unfortunately goes dry, just because there isn't enough evidence, nothing concrete to back up any of these theories. She was declared legally dead on the 24th of March 2010, exactly 12 years after she went missing. The disappearance of Maura Murray was one that was shrouded with mystery within online communities a few years ago, with the 21-year-old going missing on February 9th, 2004 after a car crash on Route 112 near Woodsville, New Hampshire. Now, the circumstances surrounding her disappearance are disturbing to say the least. Something just doesn't add up. On the day that she went missing, the 9th, she had emailed her campus professors taking a week off due to a death in her family. However, it was later confirmed that there wasn't a death within her family. That evening at 7:27 PM, a car crash was reported, and soon a passerby asked if the woman involved was in need of any assistance. The woman declined, but the passerby still reported the incident when they arrived home. At 7:26 PM, law enforcement arrived at the scene of the crime, but Maura Murray was gone. Did she voluntarily disappear? Was she abducted, or was something else going on? There were claim sightings of her, but never anything substantial. And this is where 112 Dirtbag comes in, as exactly 8 years after her disappearance, this crazy old man uploaded a video titled Happy Anniversary, in which he is hysterically laughing. The 112 in his name is a reference to the route that Maura Murray was on, and the dirtbag was in reference to her father, who believed that she was abducted, calling whoever did this a dirtbag. So people thought that the dirtbag was the abductor, but having done an investigation into him, the police concluded that he had nothing to do with the situation. And so this is where everything goes dry, with the 18th anniversary of her disappearance being in a few weeks' time. Brian Shaffer was a 27-year-old medical student from Ohio who back in 2007 went missing after celebrating spring break with some friends. They had assumed that he went home early, but this was not the case, as CCTV footage caught him talking to two women that night just before 2 AM. This would be the last time that we know he was ever seen, with the man disappearing into thin air that night. He was on a pub crawl at the time, and had eaten dinner with his dad to celebrate finishing the semester. According to his dad, Shaffer was tired after all that cramming, and he didn't think that he would go out with his friends, but didn't want to air any reservations. The last bar on this pub crawl was the Ugly Tuna Saloona, which is where Shaffer was separated from his friends. He was shown on CCTV talking to two women, as I said before, walking off camera to go into the bar, it's thought, but there was no footage of him leaving. The only other exit was a service store, apparently hard to operate when sober, let alone drunk, which Shaffer very much was. Everyone who saw him that night took lie detectors, except for William Florence, one of Shaffer's friends that he went out with, and also the two women that Shaffer spoke to last, but they stated that they were never asked. His girlfriend Alexis Wagner called his phone every night for a while after his vanishing, and one night it actually rung instead of going to voicemail. It could have been a glitch, but it was tracked 14 miles northwest of Columbus, the city that Brian went missing in. Nothing ever came of this though, and there have never been any breaks in the case since, except for one time after Brian's father died. Someone claiming to be Brian posted a short message, but this is all but confirmed to be fake. There are more thoughts that he survived than in other entries. A few people think that he just decided to start a new life for some reason. A mere month before he disappeared, his mother had died of cancer. And though Shaffer's friends say that he handled it well, if he was to have run away, this would have a major impact in his decision. But it's generally accepted that Brian is no longer with us, as is the conclusion with most of these entries. Jennifer Kesse was a 24-year-old woman who went missing in January 2006 in Florida. She was last seen at 6 p.m. January 23rd, 2006, so going on 16 years now as of the time of writing this. She spoke on the phone to her father at 6:15 p.m. and her boyfriend at 10 p.m. saying goodnight. Now, this is only where we can speculate because her boyfriend was the last known person to speak to her, and she hadn't been seen since the evening before. It's thought that at some point between 7:30 a.m. and 8, she left to go to work. She usually called her boyfriend before work, and so between 8 and 9, he called her because he hadn't heard from her. She never arrived at work that morning, with her parents growing more concerned by the minute. There was no signs of forced break-in within her apartment, leading authorities to believe that she was abducted whilst going to her car. And this is where things actually get quite interesting because her car was eventually found about a mile away from her home. It had been dropped off at noon that day, and security footage actually shows someone getting out of that car and walking away. But due to the quality of the camera, their face was indistinguishable. In every shot of them, they were obscured by fences, with the FBI dubbing the figure the luckiest person of interest ever. This person stood between 5'3" and 5'5" tall, and had likely wiped down the car afterwards, as there were very little signs of any DNA evidence. Kesse's keys, iPod, purse, briefcase and clothes were missing from her car. Her card has never been used since the disappearance, and this is unfortunately now a cold case. So this next one is a little bit different to the other disappearances that I have on the Iceberg, and you actually might have heard of this next person. Her name is Amelia Earhart, and she was actually the first female pilot to fly solo across the Atlantic, which she did in 1932. She's probably the most famous female pilot of all time, maybe the most famous pilot, full stop. But ever so slightly less famous than her achievements was her eventual disappearance in 1937. She was attempting to fly to Howland Island, but never arrived. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance are quite weird, as the Coast Guard cutter, the Itasca, waited there to guide her, but she never came. Battling atrocious weather, faulty radio transmissions, and a rapidly diminishing fuel supply in her twin-engine Lockheed Electra plane, she and her associate Fred Noonan lost contact with the Itasca somewhere over the Pacific. Despite a search and rescue mission of an unprecedented scale, including ships and planes from the US Navy and Coast Guard scouring some 250,000 square miles of ocean, they were never found. So what happened to them? Well, they could have died at sea. The most popular theory is that they crashed and then died on impact or perhaps drowned. However, there is a more interesting yet still quite dark theory that they actually survived the crash. The theory is that Earhart and Noonan were able to find Gardner Island and somehow make it there instead. The island was uninhabited at the time, and the theory is that Earhart and Noonan would have stayed there for a few weeks before eventually passing, but the likelihood is that they died on impact with the ocean or drowned shortly thereafter. Johnny Gosch was a 12-year-old boy from Iowa who in 1982 disappeared and has not been found since. He usually woke up his father to do his morning paper round, but on September 5th, he decided not to wake his dad and took his miniature dachshund instead. It was confirmed that he was able to pick up his papers that morning, but this was the last that he was ever seen. Multiple witnesses say that they remember him speaking to a man in a blue car, but their accounts vary on where this car was from, with a neighbour claiming it was from Nebraska, and another witness that might have had a better look saying that it was from Warren County, Iowa after undergoing hypnosis. Gosch was one of the first lost children to have their pictures put on milk cartons, but this unfortunately did nothing to help his recovery. Since going missing, there have been a lot of interesting events that have almost cracked the case. One of the bigger ones included alleged photographs of several boys in captivity, in which Gosch's mother claims that one of the boys who is still unidentified is her son. There was also the case of Paul A. Bonacci, who claimed that he had been abducted as a teenager and was forced to be an accomplice in Johnny's kidnapping. Johnny's mother, Noreen Gosch, said that he knew a few things about Johnny that only someone who knew him would know. Johnny's mother also said that at some point in 2005, Johnny actually came home with an unidentified man. According to her claim, Johnny would always look to this unidentified man for permission to speak, but her claim has never been confirmed. So what happened to Johnny then? In truth, we really don't know for certain, but it's clear that he was abducted at some point. Therefore, he might still be alive despite being over 50, and one day, hopefully, his mother and the rest of his family can gain some closure on the matter. Just with the amount of different breaks in the case, I feel like this could be one that we might get to the bottom of in the future. Unfortunately, right now we don't have any concrete or clear answers. And there's also been a bunch of stuff that I've had to miss out from this entry because it would just be way too long, but I do advise you to look into it if you're interested. Onto the second tier, and things are going to get more obscure as what happens with Iceberg charts. And I do hope that you guys don't mind me doing longer entries for these that might be 2 to 3 minutes long, because in most videos, most of my entries tend to be about a minute, but I really do want to do right by the families of these people and try to explain as much as possible so that people can get the most important facts, and then if they choose to research it more, they can. Sabrina Aisenberg is the youngest person on this list so far to go missing, which is such a shame. On the night of November 23rd, 1997, the 5-month-old went missing from her crib, and when her parents woke up the following day, they both noticed the garage door and the door connecting to the house open. The authorities searched intensely, but they were never able to find Sabrina. And even now, this year being the 25th year that she's missing, she has never been found, which is just awful. Now, I don't want to speak ill of the victim's family, which, if innocent, must be heartbroken by all of this. But it should be mentioned that though the Aisenbergs were never charged in connection to Sabrina's disappearance, in 1999 the couple was charged in a federal indictment with making false statements to law enforcement and conspiracy to make false statements. The indictment revealed that prosecutors had bugged the Aisenbergs' home for 3 months after Sabrina's disappearance. Prosecutors alleged that they had recorded conversations between the couple in which Steve Aisenberg had talked about killing Sabrina while high on cocaine. The Aisenbergs denied these charges and claimed that they never said those things. Their neighbours, Mary and Pete MacDonald, claimed that on the night that baby Sabrina went missing, the husband Pete MacDonald heard a baby crying. And it was only the next day that he realised that it might have been Sabrina. Therefore, the abduction is possible. Her parents still keep a spare room in their house in case she ever comes home. The case of Lars Mittank is the most recent disappearance that I have on this video. He went missing at the age of 28 in July 2014 while on holiday in Bulgaria. A short while before his disappearance, he got into a fight in a bar with some football fans. He was a Werder Bremen fan, and the German nationals that he argued with were Bayern Munich fans. Leaving the bar, he also left his friends, and turned up the next morning saying that he had been beaten up by 4 men hired by the football fans that he had argued with earlier. Due to this, he had an injured jaw and a ruptured eardrum, was prescribed an antibiotic called Cefrizil, and was advised not to fly back to Germany. So his friends went back while he stayed for a few days. He stayed in his hotel appearing paranoid and frightened by CCTV, calling his mother and telling her that the men would come back to kill him. On July 8th, the day that he was meant to travel back, he was at the airport but was interrupted by an unknown man when consulting with the doctor. This caused him to flee, and CCTV footage has shown him leaving the airport and eventually climbing over a fence, never to be seen again. His disappearance is very much different to others on the list. Is there a larger conspiracy at play? Could he still be alive, or could he accidentally have died somewhere? Apparently, the medication he was taking had rare personality-altering side effects. Did this have an impact on him? Did he ever make it back to Germany, or is he still in Bulgaria? Of all of these people so far, I'd say he's the most likely to be alive, but those chances are still slim, I'd say. This is by no means a cold case, and he's still being looked for to this very day. Tara Calico was 19 years old when she went missing in New Mexico on the 20th of September 1988. She had left home at 9:30 AM to go on her daily bike ride. She usually went with her mother until recently, when her mother stopped after thinking that she was being stalked. She advised Calico to get some mace, but Calico never did. She told her mother to pick her up if she wasn't back by midday, and of course she wasn't, so her mother called the police, who found her Sony Walkman. Her mother thought that she might have dropped this to try and give a hint as to where she was going. Many people saw her ride her bike that day, but unfortunately, no one saw her being taken. Although several witnesses observed a light-coloured pickup truck with a camper shell following closely behind her. The case was closed until June of next year, where there might have been a disturbing breakthrough. In a convenience store in Florida, a photograph of a bound and gagged boy and girl was found, with the girl on the left being thought to be Tara. Scotland Yard reiterated that they thought it was her, and her mother was also sure that the girl was in fact Tara, but the FBI was less convinced. The woman who found the photo said that it was in a parking space where a white, windowless Toyota cargo van had been parked when she arrived at the store. She said that the van was driven by a man who appeared to be in his 30s. This photo made the news, and there was a woman out there who thought that the boy in the photo was her son, so she got into contact with Tara's mum. This has since been deemed as unlikely, as the woman that got into contact with Tara's mum, her son's remains were found a year later, a few kilometres from where he went missing. It's believed that he had wandered off while camping and never made it back. The trail ends from there for the most part, but as recently as September 2021, apparently a new lead has been found in the case. So don't be surprised if it's solved in the near future. The Springfield Three. This is our first confirmed serial kidnapping, with friends Susanna, known as Susie Streeter, Stacey McCall, and Susie's mother, Cheryl Levitt, all having gone missing from Levitt's home in Springfield, Missouri. All of their personal belongings were left behind, and the only evidence of struggle was a broken porch-like globe. When they went missing in 1992, Cheryl Levitt, the mother, was 47. Her daughter Susie was 19, and Susie's friend Stacey was 18. The friends were meant to stay at their friend Janelle Kirby's house after graduating from high school, but they were partying that night, and they deemed it too crowded, so they went home to Susie's. Now, it's thought that they made it home because the jewellery that they were wearing was found at the house. However, the timeline of when they would have went missing is quite loose. It would have been sometime after 2 AM, but before 9 AM because their friend Janelle Kirby came round to their house with her boyfriend. She found the back door open and the family dog visibly shaken. While there, apparently she received a phone call of a sexual nature but hung up from it. She then received another and once again hung up. Compared to other entries, there hasn't been so many major breakthroughs or leads except for one, that being Robert Craig Cox, a convict imprisoned in Texas for kidnapping and murder. Now, this could just be Cox trying to insert himself into the story, but he did live in Springfield, Missouri at one point, and he says that he knows where they are. He says that their bodies are buried somewhere but won't ever be recovered. If he's telling the truth, however, and he lives for a few years longer, he actually said that one day he will release where they are once his mother dies. This was 30 years ago now, and he would have been an adult when he did all that kidnapping and murder, so his mother must be getting up there in age by now. So hopefully one day, if he is true to his word, we will find out what happened to the three of them. However, as I said, this year will mark the 30-year anniversary that they went missing. The disappearance of Lauren Spierer is a more recent event, with the 20-year-old going missing in 2011 in Indiana. The ICU student disappeared when she was out drinking with friends, and according to witnesses, she was very intoxicated. The police were able to create a rough timeline of her disappearance, and an abbreviated version goes as followed. At 12:30, she goes to Jay Rosenbaum's apartment, with Corey Rossman, Rosenbaum's neighbour, also there. At 1:46 AM, they go to a sports bar where she loses her shoes and her phone. At 2:48 AM, they go back to Rossman's apartment, where she was talking to Rossman's roommate, Michael Beth. Beth wanted her to stay at his house for the night for her safety, but she wanted to sleep at hers. At 3:30 AM, she goes to Rosenbaum's apartment after Beth wanted Rosenbaum to look after her, and she leaves at 4:30 AM to go back to hers. And I think that this is an important time to mention that if you're going out with your friends, do stay as a group as and where you can. Make sure that you're in contact with each other. I'm really bad for leaving without telling my friends, and it's a really, really bad habit because it does freak them out. So do make sure that you're in constant contact, especially if someone's had a bit too much. If this message can help just one person, even myself, it will be worth it. Her boyfriend texted her the next morning, but her phone was left at the bar, and this is when he called the police. So what happened to her then? We just don't know. It is a potential that she might have overdosed on drugs and then the boys just hid her body to try and cover it up or something, but apparently this is unlikely. Or at least it is according to the private investigator hired by Spierer's parents. University kids do drugs. To try and cover up the fact that they don't would be a bit illogical. She also could have been abducted, but there's not too much evidence pointing towards this. There's no leads at least. She could have been murdered, as 4 years later, another woman at the same university went missing, with the phone of Daniel Messel found at her corpse's feet, but the two disappearances seem to be more of a coincidence than anything. So that's the major information that we know, and as of writing this, it's been over a decade. It's really tough to see where this one might go. There's not many leads, there's not much evidence pointing to anything really, but as with all of these, I think we all hope for a breakthrough in the case eventually. Nicholas Barclay was 13 years old when he went missing in his San Antonio neighborhood. He was a troubled child, and while at first his disappearance was attributed to him running away, after a day when he didn't come home, the police were contacted. He was last seen playing basketball with his friends, but with no car, no credit card, and nothing really to trace. The trail therefore soon ended. This should have been for the most part where the story concluded, but there was a shocking twist of fate soon to come. This twist of fate occurred 3 years later when, in a small Spanish village, Nicholas Barclay had been found alive. His sister went to pick him up and flew across the Atlantic to be returned to his family. However, something was off with the teenager. His hair was a different colour, and so was his eyes. He claimed to have been trafficked, and that his abductors dyed his hair and coloured his eyes so he wouldn't be identifiable, and that he had eventually escaped them, being a much different person to who he was before. The private investigator who worked closely with the Barclays noticed many oddities in Nicholas's story. He seemed more mature than traumatised, and the private investigator thought that the abductors would not dye a child's hair. And that's when he noticed the teen's ears were different to what they were a few years ago, not to mention the fact that it's near impossible to change a person's eye colour permanently. As it turns out, this man was an imposter, and in the excitement of getting their young child back, the Barclays had not noticed subtle clues right in front of them. This boy was actually 23-year-old Frederick Pierre Bourdin, known as the Chameleon due to the over 500 personas he had adopted in his life. This wasn't the first time that he had posed as a missing child either, he actually did it 3 times in his life. He was eventually arrested for 6 years after being found out, but blamed the Barclay family, saying that they knew more than they were letting on. He thought that they had killed Nicholas. The private investigator from before, the one that discovered Bourdin's identity, allegedly believed that he was onto something, but to this day we still have no confirmation on anything that happened back in June 1994. So our 15th entry on the list today is Morgan Nick, who went missing on the 9th of June 1995 at the age of 6. She had gone to a Little League baseball game with her mother, and at 10:30 PM asked her if she could go and catch some fireflies with her friends. She was granted this request, being seen a mere 15 minutes later by her friends emptying sand out of her shoes nearby her mother's car. Her friends have since reported a creepy man talking to her while she was emptying sand out of her shoes. The game finished a few minutes after, and her friends came back without her. Her friends told her mother that Morgan was at the car, but when her mother arrived, she was gone. This would be the last time that Morgan Nick was ever seen or heard of by the public, with only a few small clues ever leading to concrete evidence. And my heart does bleed for everyone on this list. It must have been incredibly tough, still would be to this day. And while Morgan Nick's story is a tragedy, it couldn't be said otherwise, sometimes we are fortunate enough to have some leading breakthroughs in some of these cases, and my next entry is one of them. This happened to Andrew Gosden. He is one of the more famous disappearances that I've seen. It might be because he is from the UK, but there has been a breakthrough in this case this very week, and there have been 2 men that have been arrested for his abduction. So 15 years ago, Andrew Gosden disappeared from London aged 15. He withdrew over £200 from his account and bought a one-way ticket from Doncaster to London, last being seen at King's Cross Station. Nobody knows why he left Doncaster to go to London. This is still a mystery to this very day. His last sighting was at 11:25 AM, and by 7 PM it was realised that he was missing, so the police were called. As this was 15 years ago, you could say that it's obvious that not much had helped in the way of a breakthrough, but you would be wrong, because as of as recently as 3 days ago, as of writing the script, probably about 5 or 6 days now, there has been a breakthrough in the case. I'm just going to read off the script right now so I don't get anything wrong. 2 men aged 38 and 45 have been arrested for human trafficking and kidnapping in connection to Gosden's disappearance. The older of the 2 men, the 45-year-old, was reportedly found with indecent images of children. Their devices have now been seized, and it might take a few months for them to be analysed, but with any luck in the near future we will be able to find out what happened to this young boy. And I think that this is a good, more positive note to end things on, because although a lot of these people have been missing for longer than Andrew, we shouldn't give up hope that none of them will be found eventually. In total, there are 52 entries on this iceberg, and I will put money that at least one of them is out there somewhere still alive. But in many ways, you might wish that no one would be alive to endure the years of pain and suffering that might have befallen upon people on this list. And it goes without saying that if you have any information whatsoever based on anyone on this list, the minuscule chance, please do call it in. This is part 1 of potentially 2 or 3 episodes on this iceberg. If this video gets enough support, then I will continue and do episode 2 and episode 3. if we get more than 2,000 likes, I will do a follow-up to this. So make sure you hit the like button. And that is it for me today. Please do subscribe as well. That would be amazing. I have a Twitter and an Instagram that you can follow. I have a Discord that you could join. Links for all of those will be in the description, as will the link to my Patreon. Speaking of which, shout out to my patrons who will be on the screen right now. Thank you guys so much for supporting me. Aside from that, please let me know what you'd like to see me do next, because I'm only 95 videos in and I'm already out of ideas. Thank you for watching.